Start or
Yep, we're good to start now. Thank you.
okay, cool. All right, so hi everyone. I'm Dylan and I'm going to be talking about waves today, specifically my favorite kind, electromagnetic waves. Um, this is a pretty cool talk, I think, and it's not really something I ever expected to get into. So a little bit about me. Um, I'm a hacker. I used to teach data structures and comp sci stuff, but also some cyber. And then I got out of that and I got into really everything offensive cyber. So that's reverse engineering. I mean, writing OffSec tools and this sort of stuff, as well as pen testing, which is what I do now. So nowadays it's mostly hacking web apps and databases. And this was my master's thesis topic. So I'm pretty excited to be talking about it. I'm originally from LA. I've lived most places though, including the Midwest and Europe. Now I'm in Seattle. In my personal life, I play chess competitively, I record music. I like pinball and I like traveling. And I actually just got back from Romania. So most of this was thrown together on a train of very questionable construction. Um, and I'm going to do my best not to read from these slides. I'm not huge on PowerPoints. So most of this stuff is a reference and we'll go through it at varying speeds. I welcome questions pretty much throughout the presentation. So if you have them, just put them in the chat or wait for the end. All right. So the basic overview of this talk is EM fields can transmit meaningful data, and EM fields are easier to modulate than you would generally think. And what we're going to be using as our EM field generator is an LCD monitor. This is not really a side channel that most people think about, but you can actually get information from a computer without ever connecting to it. And that's relevant with air-gapped networks. So a couple definitions. An air-gapped network is just a network of computers that have no inbound or outbound means of communication. So no internet, no email, nothing of the sort. If you want to touch them, you have to physically touch them. C2s are kind of the backbone of modern non-ransomware based malware. At its core, this is a little bit of a malware talk. So we're going to be talking not about malware, but about C2s and their relevance for what we're doing here. LCDs, they're just the market leader in desktop monitors. And I chose that as an attack surface because most of the research in this area is CRT specific. It just comes from that era. And AM is the counterpart to FM radio. So the intensity of the wave is modulated instead of the frequency of the oscillations. And that's kind of cool. I think AM is a preferable means of transmission for this because we're only interested in amplitude peak. And I'll show you what we're talking about a little bit later. So the basics of how EM fields work is pretty interesting. You can read about it if you want, but it's not really required for understanding this attack. The important thing to understand here is that all electronic devices emit EM fields. And that's really, that's the basis of this. So that includes your microwave, like your watch, your computer, but also your computer screen and your phone and all of it. And I actually have here, this little receiver is what's going to let us listen to those EM fields. All right, so this is how transverse waves propagate. So what we see on the right here, this little GIF diagram, we have the red part of the wave is the electricity and the blue part would be the magnetic part of our EM wave. This is a rough idea of what we're actually capturing with this receiver. And then on the left here, we have a diagram of what an EM field is. So a field is just made up of multiple waves. And that's pulled from the Tempest standards as kind of released by the NSA. So the NSA has a bunch of documentation and research around this and securing this specific side channel attack. Most of it's not public. So I was able to pull this out of one of their limited and rescinded public docs. Okay. So a very brief history on hacking. So modern hacking kind of really got started in 1971 when phreaking got published. I mean, it was known about, but then it was really known about. And then the first era of recognizable hacking is when Kevin Mitnick started doing stuff with passwords. So not necessarily cracking a network, but oh, this guy has a 3-character password. It's kind of stupid. I can get it to the system that way. And you don't see that so much anymore, but it's at least recognizable compared to trying to hack telecommunications companies with noises. The relevance for this talk really starts in 1985. So Wim van Eck dropped this paper that is all about capturing information from monitors. And his focus was on televisions, and he actually demonstrated that he could reconstruct an image from a TV several hundred feet away, just with a receiver, and reconstruct it on another TV, which is essentially magic, because up until this point, people were aware of this idea, but it was kind of thought that this is something that's limited to nation states due to the complexity. And here's this Dutch researcher who basically proved to everybody it's not that hard. And then the story continues, mostly more of the same up until the early 2000s. And then we start to see C2s. And we're going to dig really into C2s briefly, but they are relevant. 2010 is Stuxnet. So Stuxnet is kind of the gold standard. I think a couple other presenters have mentioned it, but we're going to dig into it a little bit. So the brief history of it is we wanted to shut down Iran's nuclear program. It's not, nobody's claimed responsibility for it, but it's well thought to be the US and Israel. And so the main problem of breaking into that is that it was an air gap facility. So C2s have some big advantages. They offer the ability to influence how malware behaves mid-engagement. And something like Stuxnet or what we're doing, the malware needs to know what to do ahead of time. And that really makes it difficult. That means we need to research who we're attacking and what we want out of this engagement a lot more than something like, oh, I hacked the system. Now I can decide what I want to do with it. So the infection method is particularly interesting because that's something that's a little more difficult than dropping a macro in a Word doc. So for Stuxnet, that was infected USBs that they distributed through conferences nearby. And there's more than one way. We're gonna talk about the different infection methods, but there is more than one way to do it. That's probably the most realistic way. Stuxnet is also wildly more complicated than what we need to get into. So their goal was to attack centrifuges. What if we just need to transmit a little bit of data outside of an air gap compound? So complication number one, many air-gapped facilities, networks, they have strong security policies in place, such as disallowing HID connections. So that makes our USB idea a little bit more difficult, but there are ways around that if you're willing to get a little bit creative. So 3 ways I want to talk about is we can have one-time physical access, we could try to bribe somebody, and we can infect USBs and just hope that they find their way into the facility. They all have advantages and disadvantages. One-time access is the hardest one to get, but it's probably the best chance for success if it's available. So if we can do it, that's what we want to do. The riskiest option is, of course, bribing an employee, because most people will not take bribes. But it's something to think about if this is truly a life or death, like you need to hack this system for some reason. And infected USBs it's a good middle ground. You're unlikely to be caught, and you can leave them everywhere, and they're cheap. Okay, so these are some questions that we need to answer, because it's a complicated attack. This is not a simple solution. This is not a simple attack where we write our malware, we distribute it, and everything is great. We win. We need to figure out what kind of monitor is used, what's the refresh rate, and what's the OS. So the most important questions here are the refresh rate and the receiver access, actually. So the refresh rate is what's going to tell us roughly what frequency we're going to be transmitting on once our malware is running, because that's basically how the field is modulated. So the faster refresh rate, we're going to be operating at a higher frequency. And it can actually be pretty tricky to find the correct frequency. Sometimes frequency harmonics can help us, but sometimes there just aren't any, or the environment is too noisy or anything of the sort. And secondly, how close can we actually get? So if this is a facility that's locked down for 5 miles all around, you can give up on this attack. Your receiver is not going to be close enough to pick up what you're actually leaking from the computer. But say it's a bank and you can just stand outside or have a dead drop in the trash nearby, that's a lot more reasonable. Okay, so rehashing the goal. We need to extract information from an air-gapped network, from a computer on an air-gapped network. Breaking that down, we need to write a program that can control an EM field from an LCD monitor by modulating the pixels on the screen. And we need to have some kind of listening station. And we need to have an infection vector. So those are the three big questions we need to answer and solve before this attack is viable. Just to go forward, let's assume that we have one-time physical access and we are close enough to actually do this. So going forward, we're going to focus on the actual tech. So what does this look like? Here we have our waves, and they're actually pretty cool. They're fun because they look like they're dancing on the screen. So what's actually happening here is we're coercing the EM field that's being emitted from the monitor. And I want to be more specific, emitted from the DVI connection in the back of the monitor. We're transmitting beeps essentially. So if you've heard Morse code, this is doing something very similar to that. You're going to hear that later during the demo. There's no stealth involved with this particular proof of concept. It is possible to write this program in such a way that it's virtually impossible to tell what's going on. But for a proof of concept, we want the strongest possible transmission, and this would be the possible strongest transmission. So yeah, the primary source of the EMR leakage in this case is the DVI connector. It was thought for a while that LCDs weren't really leaky in the same way that CRTs are, which is where most of the research is focused. And it's kind of true. They're not really leaky in the same ways that CRTs are. They're leaky in a very different way. So let's talk about why that misconception exists. Okay. So high frequency variations of light emitted by a CRT they don't have to, but they can contain enough information from the video signal to reconstruct readable text. What that means is CRTs there's so much electricity flowing through them, their field is strong enough that we can easily create, without an additional leakage source, we can recreate what is on the screen with the right tooling. And that's even practical in very noisy environments because they're so loud. LCDs aren't really vulnerable to that particular risk. They don't have that much voltage flowing through them. So the two main reasons for that is their pixels are just slower than CRT phosphors are. And because they also update all pixels in a row simultaneously, it becomes kind of impractical to separate each individual pixel in the row for the overall emission. And the technical reason for why that is LCDs lack deflection coils. So compared to CRTs, that would make them low radiation devices operating in frequencies below 400 kilohertz. The second part to that is LCDs operate with much lower voltages. So CRTs amplify the video signal of about 100, which is what's driving the control grid to modulate the electron gun that's actually making the pixels appear. LCDs just don't need to work that way, which is great. Okay, yeah, let's talk about the hardware. So I've shown off this little receiver. This bad boy right here it was $24 when I bought him, and it's worked pretty well. It survived a lot of travel. It's a little bit less strong than it is now, or than it started was, but you can do a lot better than a $20 receiver. And a software-defined radio, we just picked out some free software. We picked out the monitor that I had. I'll be showing it shortly. And then for the victim, we used Windows 10 because it's just easy. And your OS, it doesn't matter for the attacker. Well, whatever your software will run on. Okay, so the proof of concept to modulate the EM field that we're going to be doing was written by Ben Hutchinson. He called this program Tempest Test for Windows. So early on, there was a program called Tempest Test for Eliza, and there's some YouTube videos out there of people playing Beethoven with this tech. It's kind of cute, but that was written for Linux, and it's honestly not, it didn't age very well. It's difficult to make it run, and when it does run, it doesn't really work all that well. It was also focused on CRTs. So this one is more modernized. What I did is I wrote an encoder for that program and a decoder, and then I built out the basically the attack framework. So it's a little bit more than just that. Okay, so there are some challenges with this attack. So the first one is just how much data there is. So what we're looking at is a graph, or it's a wave. This is essentially a wave file. And this is something that's going to transmit the string tasty food 7, probably because when I was testing this, I was a little bit hungry. And this would be an example of a low bandwidth transmission. There's lots of ways we can filter our data, and low bandwidth leads to graphs that look a little bit like this. So what we're actually interested in, and I'll be showing this graph up close sooner to talk more about it. What we're interested in is the negative peaks. So all of those, everything below about 8,000, everything below negative 8,000 is what we care about. So roughly there. Everything else above this, we don't care about this. This is just noise data. So it's difficult to select a good filter because these graphs can look very different. As a general rule, lowering the bandwidth increases the amplitude distance between signal noise and transmitted data. That's not what happened in this particular case, but as a general rule, that would happen. It does come with a drawback though, and that drawback is the first few beeps will sit outside of the threshold that comfortably fit the majority of the rest of the transmission. On the flip side, high bandwidth transmissions kind of smooth everything in the WAV file, but the problems with low bandwidth are actually still present, just to a lesser degree. Medium bandwidth is a nice alternative, and the peaks are smooth and easily fit within this threshold, but the noise is actually louder than the data. So you wind up with a graph where you have beautiful data in the center and then noise on the outside, and that noise is not actually trivial to prune, programmatically at least. So one thing, the big takeaway here is no matter how you filter your data or what kind of software you write, you're going to need to do some manual massaging of the decoding. The whole point of the decoding is because this gets very tedious very quickly. So challenge number 2, the bit rate really sucks. There's just no way around it. It takes forever to get any meaningful data. So this actually brings us back to malware and back to C2s. So we know that we need to be extremely picky about what we want to transmit. We need to write our malware in such a way that it's going to seek that out and transmit only that. So we're not actually getting any additional data and slowing down the bit rate even further just because we're transmitting stuff we don't care about. Yes, that's what I wanted to talk about for that. And then finding the correct frequency is difficult. You really need to do some good reconnaissance with this attack. You need to know as much about your monitor, your target monitor as possible. Even knowing the age of it can help. Tech degrades over time, and it's possible that the refresh rate is not what it was when it first started. It could be slightly slower or just sloppier internals and still functional, but it's just not leaking in the same way that a fresh one off the shelf would leak. And yeah, that recon helps. So I want to pause here, take any questions you have, and then do a quick demo. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing and bring up something else. Okay. So full program, let's get into the waves first. So this is the first wave that I ever recorded, and it's actually a very nice wave. So this is an early transmission that says hello. And the way this actually works is we look at our transmissions, or look at our negative amps, and here we can say roughly 12,000 is a good threshold. So everything below this is data, everything above this we don't care about. And we can see the transmission links. You can maybe tell that these are not the same size. So we have a short, a long, a long, a long, a short, a short. And actually, that would be an H for hello. So this is what our transmission actually looks like visualized. And now maybe the insanity of this. This is not pleasant to decode by hand, which is what influenced building a decoder. So how do we actually handle the decoding? So for one, we take in the WAV file and we convert it to text, and this gives us this. So this lovely file is actually what is fueling the entire, this is what we're rebuilding our text from. And somewhere in here we'll have meaningful data. But when I say there's a lot of data, I mean there's a lot of data. Okay. So first off, actually, I'm just going to run this program. Just so we can see what it looks like. So this is decoding this graph. So you can see it correctly finds the first as a short, and then we have a long, and then a long, and then a long. So short, long, long, short, short. I am not going to go through all of this, and then this transmitted code is going to be remapped later back into ASCII, into something reasonable for us. So this is really a test program. This is developed for testing all of this output, but this is actually the decoding algorithm. This is the basis of it. So first off, we remove all data points that are outside of our threshold. So everything under negative 12,000, that's what was chosen for this graph. Everything under negative 12,000, we just nuke it. Don't need it, but we can't destroy it. If you take out the data completely, then you lose the gaps in between, the actual transmissions. And those are very important for determining when a transmission begins and ends, because that's what we're actually counting. We're counting the transmission links, not the amplitude. So we zero them, and that allows us to keep the data inside of it, but not really care about it. So this is furthering zeroing. We're just going through and we're counting the zeros now. We're basically marking them. This is the essence of the algorithm. This is the core part, realizing that there's about 7,000 frames between each transmission, and then essentially throwing out anything that doesn't meet that transmission threshold. This is what allows us to prune the data effectively. Down here, we just go through a little bit of math, and now we actually map them to time. So this is their algorithm that converts it into time as we speak. So this would be 0.25 seconds, and that would be extra short. So anything that's extra short, we don't care about. That fits outside of our threshold of what's acceptable. The same thing is for extra long transmissions. We throw those out. Everything that's left, anything between 0.35 and the duration or 0.65 in the duration, is either a short or a long. And that's what we're going to actually use as our algorithm. So I would like to show you now what it looks like to capture the data. And I'm also going to show you the mapping. So I'll be adding this to the Discord later for anyone that wants to go through this process. But the way we actually map this data is about exactly as you'd expect. If we want to select a queue, we have 6 shorts. So short, 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 short. If we want to select an E, we would have short, 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 select this first row, and then E would be 2. So short, short, long. So short, 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 long could be an E. And all the way down, this is true for the whole thing. Yes. I hope you guys can hear this, but this would be a high bandwidth transmission. And then it's going to transition into a low bandwidth. So you can see the bandwidth right here. As that moves, you can hear how it's different. And then I'll give you a better example of this. I just recorded this yesterday. So as it decreases, the noise gets louder and closer. Too low, you don't get enough signal. Let's get medium bandwidth transmission. So almost ideal in this place. And now I want to demonstrate just how long it actually is. So we're going to look at the screen, and then we're going to do the transmission range, frequency range. So this is a special little message. It says hello Cal Polypomona, but I'll be adding a nicer version of that to the Discord for anyone that wants to do that decoding. Okay, so let's take a look at this graph again. For this, we want to use a threshold of negative 8,000, and we're going to be decoding this one live. So hopefully the program, it can be finicky. Hopefully it's in a good mood today and it decodes well. We're going to listen to a little bit of it, and I want you to hear the difference between a low bandwidth transmission and a high bandwidth transmission. So I'm going to pull up the graph and this. That's about enough to get the idea. The noise in that field is very much the same level as the beeps, which leads to this kind of sameness where it all looks relatively the same. And let's compare that to a high wave. So this is just the first part of the message that we listened to. It says hello. You see how it's a lot more chaotic, which doesn't make sense for a smooth graph, but in this case, the beeps are actually much louder than the even not audibly, but in amplitude. Okay, so let's decode these. And you'll say, why do we have two decoders? They come with their own issues. So these graphs, decoding them, the same tool doesn't work exactly well. So when I say we need to massage data, really the first step in decoding these and executing these attacks is generating this graph and just looking at the data and seeing, okay, is there anything visually obvious? So for this one, there is something visually obvious. We misinterpret this right here as an extra short peak. And that actually ruins our program. And we also take this, we misinterpret this as an extra long peak. And when you look at enough of these, you start to see patterns in certain types of transmissions. So being a low bandwidth transmission, we can make the assumption that we can cut off any extra longs that are at the end of it. And we should really look aggressively at the start. So in this particular one, we do need to cut off an extra short at the start, but that's not necessarily true for all of them. So let's see if the program is in a mood to give us a show today. Low.wave. So we're going to feed it the wave file, not the graph. And we're going to use a threshold of negative 8,000. And you can see here, it goes through all of this. It successfully does the transmission, mapping, and then it's able to spit out Tasty Food 7. And now we can look at it again for the high decode. And your threshold does matter. So 2400 is functional for this one. But what happens if we just read that incorrectly and we say it's 2300? We get an error. And you can see that it's has an excess here. It's now catching data. That's if we're too restrictive with our threshold. What happens if we're too generous with it? Then again, we break. So finding that that magic bullet is very difficult, and often case you'll have to get a feel for the data. There's no better way to say it. It just takes a little bit of practice and experience to find what is really going to be useful. Okay. Let's go back to the presentation. We're almost through it today. We're making excellent time. Okay, so I showed you how the decoding actually works. This is the mapping of the data itself. So this is the only part of the program you haven't seen. This is the full thing. I wanted to show this off because it's not particularly impressive, but this kind of goes back to a core theme in cyber in that having something that's functional today is better than having something that's beautiful and might work in 3 months. So this code is not brilliant, but it works. It's perfectly functional. And yeah, this mapping is just an extension of what we've seen earlier. So for additional research, we want to look at the transmission rate. That's really the main, the key pivotal thing that's killing this as a viable attack. It's just so slow to transmit things. And there has been some work on it by the Airhopper team based out of, I forget which university. They're based out of an Israeli university. They do some very interesting work, more with mobile, but it's also with Tempest. And it's also good to do some materials testing. So what can we actually record through? I'm currently in an apartment, but when I did this research, I was in a much less noisy environment, and I was able to record through multiple walls and a mirror. I don't think that would be possible in my current setup. So your location matters, and also just the construction of where you are matters. You know, I'm sure a brick wall is a little bit different than drywall. And then better range of definitions. So the NSA is very shy about releasing anything that would give information about their research. So we don't really know, or at least there isn't publicly documented research on how far we can actually listen to things. There's theoretical research, but proof of concepts are very hard to come by. And it's a relatively small field. There is one more thing I want to talk about. Oh, actually, yeah, better encoding methods. We should cover that. So you can actually use notes because this is kind of, in a way, an instrument. If you want to encode a C minor as a certain character, you can. That either requires perfect pitch or MIDI transcription software that's a bit better than what we currently have. It's a challenging endeavor in its own right. But I did record an EP using my monitor as a synth. I'll be it's kind of a strange sentence, but it's just so fun. I'll be linking that in the Discord as well as everything else that I've shown today. And okay, aside from monitors, can this method be used to pick up data from any connected device? So it depends on what you mean by connected device. All devices emit some kind of data. Whether your microwave's data is going to be discernible or interesting, and we can tell any device with power, correct? So any electronic device. It's really just up to the research to do it. So I know there are some people that are working on trying to figure out what's going on through routers using this kind of stuff. I don't have a lot of hope for that just because there's such high variance in EM fields. But yeah, it is kind of crazy. I might have answers for you. I'm happy to take them. I'm also active in the Discord. Before I start taking questions, I do want to throw you guys a freebie though, because I get asked this, people in their early career, literally every year at DEF CON. Also, if you see me at DEF CON, come say hi. How do I get into the offensive side? So there is a two-part answer to that I want to give. So don't slouch on any part of tech. I've heard some advice that you shouldn't really waste your time with C or learning to program, or pick a thing that's not directly relevant for OffSec. And it's true, you don't need C to be a pen tester. But if you ever want to write an exploit, having that understanding of low-level memory management or how the stack works, that's a huge step up on people that haven't done that. So, and that's applicable for any cyber adjacent knowledge. Really don't slouch on your tech. Get into it because you love it. And secondly, and less commonly given, is be the people person. I originally got into cyber because I wanted to work directly with systems instead of people. And now working with people and doing social engineering engagements is my favorite part of the job. It's also incredibly valuable just to have good people skills. That's what I wanted to give. Okay, we have a question. Data size is in gigabytes or terabytes. Does the computer run an STR needed device that does TX or RX? Can you elaborate on TX or RX? And the data size, it depends what you want to transmit. This file itself, let's take a look. This very short transmission that just says hello is 7.3 megs. So that is a lot of data. It grows very quickly if you want to be transmitting a lot of things. Anything else? I know we actually ran a little bit ahead of schedule. Happy to give some time back. People can take a little break in between the talks if you like. All right. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed giving this, and I will be active in the Discord if you guys think of anything at all. So I'm happy to talk about this more. This really is a passion for me. Will this be viable as a C2 channel? That's a very interesting question. It's viable as a one-way C2 channel, but that kind of kills the second part of C2, which would be the control. So just because we have visibility into an environment doesn't mean we can actually interact with that. So maybe if you have a person on the inside that doesn't have the technical know-how to relay information to you about the system, but once you're able to gather some data, you can give them more specific instructions. That could be a form of a C2, if a little bit of a scuffed one, but not in the traditional sense where, you know, we break into a system, because the whole point is that we're trying to get data from air-gap networks. And the whole point of an air-gap network is it doesn't leak data. That is the core issue there.
All right, does anyone else have any more questions? No. Okay. All right, cool. Well, thank you, Dillon. Again, he's available on Discord if you have any more questions, and we also will provide the slides later on today. Yeah, thank you, Dillon.
Thank you.
Okay, next speaker is at 2:30. So if you guys want to get a snack, I think there's a lot of snacks left. Feel free to do so. Stretch your legs, talk to some people, fill out the bingo card. That'll be awesome.